Thanks, Daryl. Welcome, everybody. This is Russ Harrison, Director of Government Relations for IEEE-USA in Washington, D.C. And as Daryl mentioned, this is our November 14th, 2019 legislative update. Lots of exciting stuff going on in Washington these days, most of which we're not going to talk about because it doesn't really involve IEEE. We will, however, start with what may become a regular feature, which are the impeachment odds. IEEE-USA has no role in the impeachment process. We have nothing to say about it because it doesn't affect engineers uniquely, and we have nothing unique to say about it. But just to let you know where people stand, right now the Vegas odds place in the odds of the House impeaching President Trump at between 75 and 78%, depending on who you look at. As you know, once the House impeaches, it then goes to the Senate for conviction. The conviction rates, the odds for conviction are much, much lower. And these numbers have been relatively steady for the last couple of months. They click up, they click down, but they're basically the same. And so what folks expect to have happen, and I'd say this is probably likely, is the House will vote to impeach, and then the Senate will find the president not guilty, and then we'll all go back to our normal business. Oh, before I go on, if any of you have any questions about what we talk about today and things that I don't bring up today, please type them into your chat box and then we'll rotate back to them at the end of the presentation. We are now in overtime for the 2020 budget. The fiscal year, of course, started October 1st. The deadline for getting a 2020 budget completed is November 21st, which they will not make. They've made actually very little progress on any of the budget stuff in the last month. The current debate now is, the current thinking now is that Congress will, early next week, extend the budget deadline to December 18th or possibly the 21st. Probably the 21st would be my guess, but we'll see. Giving them more time to get the budget done. The problem, of course, is there's only about 3 weeks between now and the 21st, remembering that we lose a week because of Thanksgiving. Given how much has to be done and how far apart the two sides are, it is unlikely that Congress is going to actually be able to pass appropriations bills. I would say it's a virtual certainty that they can't, which means they will either do a continuing resolution into 2020 or they'll just do an omnibus bill. We're getting close to the point where even an omnibus bill is difficult. They just don't have time to write it, which suggests that it is likely that they're just going to punt again and push the deadline into 2020, either end of February, maybe early March, or they can punt all the way till October, and then all the conversations we've had about the federal budget are moot because we're just going to keep doing what we're doing. Which would be a shame at this point because we did get some nice increases in some of the research budgets and some of the technology budgets. But, there's only so much we can do on these things. So that's where we are in the budget. Export controls, well, this is another reoccurring feature we have in these presentations. As each month I tell you the brand new rumors on when the administration is going to come out with its new export control rules. You may recall that the decision to start the process of reviewing those rules began just over a year ago. It was late October of 2018, and then comments on the new rules were due in January, so it's about 11 months ago. And we've been waiting ever since for the administration to do something. The newest rumors are that the hard work on the new restrictions has really just now started. And that they hope to get the new restrictions in place in February, March, late February, early March, and that they will be targeting very specific technologies. There was a concern at the beginning of this process that the administration would do something like declare all AI technology was governed by export control rules. Well, that appears to not be the case. They are trying to focus specifically on the exact technologies that they want to prevent from getting to certain countries, while still allowing most transactions to take place. Rumor also has it that the new rules on fundamental research will appear in January. For what I've seen of their progress, that seems optimistic, but you know, if they want to get it done quickly, they can. But either way, it looks like the export control things that we've been looking for the past year will not make an appearance publicly for at least a few more months. Immigration reform, both the Relief Act and the Fairness Acts are stuck. You will recall from last month, Senator Durbin introduced his Relief Act, which would create a large number of new visas for skilled workers, green cards for skilled workers, which IEEE-USA has endorsed that bill. The Fairness Act simply removes the country caps from the EB visa program. IEEE-USA is neutral on that bill because it helps some IEEE members and hurts others. Right now, the sponsors of those two bills, Senator Durbin for the Relief Act and Senator Lee for the Fairness Act, are negotiating a compromise that will allow them both to move. However, my understanding is those negotiations aren't going very well, and that there are additional senators waiting to object if a deal is struck. Senator Lee has decided to move his Fairness Act on unanimous consent, but the problem with unanimous consent is that everybody has to agree to it, and it is increasingly clear that that's simply not going to happen. Senator Lee's backup plan was to try to get the Fairness Act injected into one of the appropriations bills, but as we just talked about, if the appropriations bills don't move, then that avenue is cut off as well. He could introduce his bill into one of the omnibus or continuing resolutions, but that's hard to do because everybody wants to do that, and if you let everybody do that, you can't even pass the budget bills. And so the avenues for moving legislation are getting smaller. The basic conflict, as it has been now for about a decade, is Democrats want more visas and Republicans don't want more visas. And there's a lot of other issues surrounding this debate, most of which I think can be worked out, but this specific problem, there's no middle ground. Either there are more or there aren't more. You can't do both. And given the atmosphere on Capitol Hill and the politics of all of this, it's getting increasingly difficult to envision a compromise that would allow legislation to move forward. Now, we're still working it, we're still talking to people. They know where we are and why this is important. It's just the politics of it make it difficult to find a middle ground solution. There we go. I mentioned last month the ARPA-E reauthorization bill, HR 4091, passed the House Science Subcommittee. It since, shortly after the presentation, passed the full House Science Committee on a voice vote, which meant it was basically, or was unanimous. So it has broad bipartisan support. Everybody on the Hill expects this to pass. The Senate had hearings on its version of this bill on November 6th. There was general bipartisan support. People were discussing and arguing about some of the details, but the basic bill was broadly supported. We do expect this bill to become law eventually, probably not too early next year. We just don't have enough legislative days left to get it through both the House and the Senate, but January, February are certainly possible. Couple things to update on AB 5. You will recall AB 5 is the gig economy bill that California passed a month or so ago. Among other things, it makes it more difficult for IT consultants in California to be consultants as opposed to being employees of a company. We have confirmed that some IEEE members have lost contracts. These are IEEE members who are consultants in California, have lost clients because they were told AB 5 does not allow the company to continue to employ consultants the way they have been doing so. Now, IEEE-USA made an argument to those companies that their interpretation of the law was incorrect. The companies came back and said, you may be right, we may be right, we don't know, because this is all going to come down to judges and we don't want to take the risk, which frankly is a reasonable position to take. I spoke to the California Consultants Network in Silicon Valley on Tuesday night about this specifically. They would like to approach the legislature about getting changes made to the law. IEEE-USA is now working with them to try to figure out what those changes would be to fix the problems, and we'll be working with California members to convey that message to legislators for next year. So IEEE members in California should stay tuned, pay attention, let your section leaders or other IEEE leaders know that you're concerned about this and want to do something. And IEEE members who are not in California need to be aware of this debate because it is popping up in other places. And Massachusetts, Connecticut, and New Jersey have similar laws to AB 5, but they're not exactly the same. And they are written in ways that make it much easier for people who want to be IT consultants to continue to be IT consultants. And so the point is, if this comes up in your state, you need to let me know so that we can look at the bill, see how it is written, make sure that there are accommodations for IT professionals, and organize a response to talk to the sponsors and the authors and the supporters in your state before it becomes law. Because, of course, changing laws before they're passed is much easier than doing it afterwards. The National Strategic Computing Initiative, an update was released this morning by the OSTP, Office of Science Technology Policy. This plan coordinates research into advanced computing and computing technology, coordinates that research across the federal government. You can see the three objectives of this project, which are taken directly from the report. There's a link down at the bottom for the report itself if you want to look at it. In general, this is a useful initiative, helping the government be more efficient with its research dollars. But it's not the research itself, and so it only goes so far. More on that in just a minute. Excuse me. This is the real stuff. Senator Schumer, Chuck Schumer from New York, has proposed what he is calling a moonshot rhetoric, which is used far too often in Washington, but this one is actually in the ballpark of being appropriate. Senator Schumer wants $100 billion in new money for technology research. That's spread out over 5 years, so it's $20 billion a year, which is not nothing. That's a lot of research. Focusing on quantum, AI, 5G, robotics, and other technologies. So in other words, this is all IEEE stuff. The plan is not to spend this on physics research or chemistry research or medical research, but just to do technology. The impetus behind this bill is national security, the concern that American research is falling behind other countries and that we need dramatic and immediate investments in certain technologies to make sure we keep up. The bill itself, there's no bill. The proposal itself, which has been made public, you can find it online all over the place, has some concerns, and we are currently talking to Senator Schumer's office to kind of make sure we understand what they're doing and also kind of maybe iron out a few wrinkles. Some of our concerns is Senator Schumer is calling for the creation of a new research agency. Well, that might not be necessary. You create a new agency, you have a bunch of new bureaucracy, which adds to the cost, which means there's less money for research. There are a number of research agencies in the government already doing this kind of stuff. Creating new work, new agencies, new protocols isn't necessarily the best approach. It's not clear who exactly will get the funding. Universities have made a pitch in other contexts for Congress to define research as university research, which obviously we support university research, but we believe the research community is much broader than just academia, to include federal labs, but also the private sector, and particularly smaller companies, which tend to be more innovative. They could stand to benefit from access to large amounts of federal research dollars. And then there's the perennial question of where this is coming from. IEEE-USA really doesn't care if they're taking it from other budgets or if it's new money. It's supposed to be new money, but that'll be part of the negotiation with the other legislators. We obviously want to make sure they don't take money from other budget priorities of the tech community to fund these priorities of the tech community. So we got to look to see how that is actually accomplished. But this is kind of exciting, and this could be a big deal. Right now, it's just part of a speech. It's not a real thing yet. But Senator Schumer does have staff that have been put on this. He is in a good position to move something like this. And so IEEE-USA will be working with him to see if we can do something good here. Privacy update. For those of you who didn't see it, Microsoft has announced that it will be following California's privacy law nationwide. That's the California Consumer Privacy Act. Among other things, the bill gives individuals, the law I should say, gives individuals access to the data that companies hold on them, the personal data that companies have, gives them the option of opting out of collection efforts, and puts restrictions on the sale and transfer of personal data. All of which is designed to respond to Europe's GDPR law. Because the United States doesn't have a privacy law, the California law is starting to emerge as a national standard, even though it only applies to California. If Microsoft is complying with the law, Microsoft is obviously a global organization, and so it pushes the norms and rules of the CCPA nationwide, and in fact, globally. Concerns have been raised about the impact the California law has on smaller tech companies because it is very expensive. I mean, it's all well and good for Microsoft to say they'll abide by it, but they have $1 trillion in the bank or whatever their balance is. For a startup, for a smaller company where money is tight, compliance is much, much more difficult. It looks like Google, Facebook, and some of the other tech companies will not be following Microsoft's example. Those are the companies that typically deal in data. Microsoft does a lot with data, but that's not primarily where it gets its money. That is primarily where Facebook gets its money. So all of this just highlights the need for Congress to get its act together and pass a national privacy law, standardizing the rules across all 50 states. A number of other states are looking at privacy laws, which will make it very, very difficult for tech companies to operate nationally. Efforts in Congress to draft and pass a privacy law were nowhere near passing, but even to draft it have basically stalled. A number of legislators are trying to do something on this issue, but they can't reach an agreement on what ought to be discussed, and thus they've done nothing. So until they start, the California law is more or less kind of the national standard, and as time goes on, it will be more so. So IEEE-USA is working with legislators, talking about how to do privacy, what does privacy look like, what is possible, what isn't, and urging them to actually take some action on this. But unfortunately, thus far, they've been unwilling to do so. Speaking of AI, IEEE-USA released its report just a few weeks ago on AI around the world, written by IEEE member, a former IEEE member and WISE student. This looks at a bunch of different countries to see how they are approaching AI, how they're regulating AI, how they're investing in AI, and just give you a better idea of what the rest of the world is doing. There's a big section on Europe, which is of course important, but there's also sections on some Latin American companies, some countries, some African countries, and some countries you wouldn't expect to be a player in this field, but are actually doing some interesting things. There's a link there on the screen to get a copy of the report. Be advised that the report is a living document, which means we intend to update it and expand it over time, because obviously countries keep doing different things, so we'll try to keep up with that. And the plan right now is to do a briefing on Capitol Hill talking about this in early-ish 2020. You have seen this slide before. Our CVD is set for the 24th and 25th of March next year. I've removed the tentative tag. And so we are going to move ahead with those dates. We don't have rooms on Capitol Hill yet, but we're going to move ahead anyway. All IEEE members are, of course, welcome to attend our CPD, and I hope you do. Our next update will be January 16th at 1 o'clock Eastern. You will note that there's an entire month between here and there. The schedule for December did not work out. There was simply too many other things going on for us to fit in an update. So we will wait until January where we'll be able to do a nice overview of what we expect to happen in 2020. And so with that, Daryl, did we have?
Russ, are you still there?
Yes, I am. Do we have questions?
Yeah, okay. Yes, we have one question. It says, are the new rules drafts for comment, or here it is live with it? Mark, could you resend that question? I believe I'm reading.
Mark, I need to know which rules you're talking about there.
Yeah.
And while we wait, just a quick announcement. Diana Labrizzi, who had helped on these webinars for several years, has tragically left us. She was accepted a very nice position with the microbiologists. I know, I don't understand either, but she is doing well, and she's right down the street from us, but she will unfortunately no longer be joining us on these calls.
Visa rules. He's referring to visa rules. Oh,
okay. Well, the two laws that we were talking about have not passed. There are a number of visa changes that changes to the visa rules that the administration has put in place. None of them have happened in the last month or so. There are a couple proposals that are being debated, one of which would slap a $10 fee on all H-1B applications, which we think is wonderful. In terms of the legislation, though, both bills are fairly limited and don't have, legislation typically doesn't have the details in it to really understand the nuances of what's going to happen. That's done by the regulators after the law is passed. So we don't have detailed rules on them, but then again, you wouldn't expect it at this point. And Mark, if you have specific questions you want to talk about, feel free to give me a call after the call. Anyone else?
There are no more questions.
Okay. Well, I want to thank you all for joining us. Hope you and your families have wonderful Thanksgivings. And I look forward to talking with all of you again on January 16th. Thank you very much.
Russ, I'm sorry, another question just came in. What is the relation of the AI and IEEE-AI? Yeah. Oh, Russ already.